you've heard, I'm Kacper Szymczak, and I'm the CEO and creative director at Artificer. Welcome to my turn-based tactical design fundamentals talk. Allow me to quickly introduce myself. I started my career at Techland, left to lead design in Creative Forge, and left to co-found Artificer. Got 16 years of design experience, and I've been making turn-based tactical games for 8 years now. I did Hard West, Phantom Doctrine, and now Artificer's first project is a turn-based tactical game too. And we're always hiring exceptional talent. We're a measure twice, cut once kind of studio, so we believe a good process is king. We envision Artificer to become the best studio for ambitious creatives, but in a sustainable way, so without demanding any personal sacrifices. And we're always hiring people, especially those who know very well what they want. Now, what do I mean by a turn-based tactical game? A game that has some sort of turn order, as opposed to real time. A game with many characters fighting on each side, so not just 1 versus 1 or 1 versus many. Games where spatial positioning is significant, placement playing a big role, and there are actual levels. And games primarily about combat, and that means I'm skipping all the RPGs that happen to have turn-based combat in them. So here are some important references that I recommend you should familiarize yourself with before you set out to do your own turn-based tactical game. XCOM 2, Jagged Alliance 2, Into the Breach, Battle Brothers, Gears Tactics, Valkyria Chronicles, Mutant Year Zero, and Invisible Ink. I firmly believe that all these games combined will tell you all there is, or almost all there is to know about turn-based tactical games. I've organized my talk into 12 tips, guidelines, and rules of thumb. 1. Use square grid for shooting-based games and use hex grid for melee games. The square grid is good for everything man-made, interiors, building, installations, all sorts of stuff like that, but bad for nature. Nature just doesn't work in a blocky environment. The hex grid is great for nature or big scale, but sucks for cities and artificial structures. For melee combat, adjacency is very important, and square grid lacks convenience, so the distance between adjacent side-by-side tiles is different than adjacent slanting tiles. That means, for example, that your animations need to work for both distances, or you may need to disallow slanting melee attacks. And hex grid, it's the same distance in all directions, so hex is far better for melee. 2. Use a 2 action point system, unless you're making a complex simulation game. We'll get to that. So because a 2 action point system is simple, there's no math to do. That is, you don't have to calculate if your action pool will be enough for all the action you would like to do in this turn. There's no need to memorize various action point costs of all your abilities, and you're never left with a couple of action points you have nothing to do with at the end of your turn. That being said, it's unfit for complex simulations with plenty minor actions like Jagged Alliance. 3. Use a simple turn system, and that means a system where players take turns, and within their turn they get to move all of their units in whatever order they prefer. Because, first of all, it's a simple system that works and is great because it's familiar. It's how most board games work. People get that. And enemy doesn't interrupt, so it's easy to synergize, easy to execute a plan, easy to combo your attacks and abilities. But if you have lots of units, turns can get long and tedious, especially when you're waiting for the enemy to do their turn. So for big battles, use a timeline instead. So how timelines work? All the units, your units and enemy units, are laid out on a timeline. And based on their initiative stat or similar, players only move that one particular unit at a time. The most familiar example probably is Heroes of Might and Magic. I'm not sure if all of those, but the good one. And here's how a timeline will affect your game. The game remains unaffected by scale. A lot of units won't slow it down. It's harder to plan ahead. Situation changes between your moves. Players tend to jump on the next serious threat on the timeline. And these games tend to be more reactionary and hectic than grand strategic. 4, make cover readable. If you have a cover system, make cover readable above all else. Look at these two examples. One is all sorts of confusing, especially the bench, and the other one is perfectly clear. So make cover readable at first glance. Good cover is blocky cover, and not all environments' contexts will lend themselves to this. For example, again, nature sucks. 5, don't make the player wait. Make players spend time thinking, not waiting. Don't let visuals stand in the way of the game. Let the player execute orders as fast as possible. Shave of seconds and milliseconds from animations, transitions, especially if you have a cover system, and animations for glowing and unglowing from cover. Implement simultaneous orders. So let your player switch to another enemy, to another character while the action is executed. However, this can be very tricky depending on your game mechanics. If there's a lot of interruptions, you're screwed and can't really do that. And implement fast forward enemy turn. Allow the player to speed up the animation in enemy turn, like in Mutant Year Zero, for example. And that's the simplest solution. Have fewer units, smaller battles, or use a timeline. Or maybe don't activate more units than you have to, or spawn them at the battle as the battle progresses. Use reinforcements and such. 6, don't overdo half cover. Full cover is better, so players will use full cover and ignore half cover. Inspect the screenshot. I've marked the only tiles that the player will find worth considering because they provide full cover. Therefore, don't overdo half covers. Level designers who are new to the genre tend to sprinkle the levels with half covers, like they would for a shooter game. But in cover-based titles, half cover are mostly irrelevant, like this object here. So treat your half covers primarily as the core. 7, end unit turn after attack. Otherwise, your game will slow down. The logic here is pretty straightforward. So moving after attack enables hit and run tactics. So you shoot, then you hide. And hit and run is effective in turn-based titles because of limited room for reaction from the enemy side. Now, hit and run is best countered by Overwatch, so waiting for the enemy to jump out and shoot them before they hide. But defensiveness is very effective, and Overwatch is abused. That's why XCOM has this awful timer, for example. 8, get your scale right. So occasionally, some games, especially early in development, from what I've seen, get their scale wrong. If the scale is too big, like you have levels too big and like too spread apart, you'll have the player scrolling the camera constantly and looking for enemies. Or worse yet, forget enemies they don't see on the screen and lose the game because of that. So try to fit your game into a screen. Ideally, most of your characters actively participating in the battle should fit within the screen. Most of your gun ranges need to fit within the screen as well. So both the shooter and the target should be visible at the same time as often as possible. And design your levels to have arenas and choke points fit into that screen as well. So the distance between choke points, that's where the battle occurs, so we want the scale of the game to be just that. 9, guarantee safe spots in your level design. Look at this place. If you happen to have a cover system that works like in XCOM, there's only one truly safe spot here, guaranteed by 3 consecutive walls, this one. And it's safe because it's the only tile in here that breaks a lot of lines of sight. So organize your play space around these safe spaces. They're critical for support abilities. Players rarely dare to cast support abilities when they can shoot instead. And safe spots allow you to lead the player through your gameplay space and through your levels. So they're like the stepping stones of progression through the level. If you lack those, players will tend to avoid moving on. So players will naturally organize their path through these. 10, control your random number generation. Now, if you're interested in game design, you've probably heard this before, and you might have seen that famous talk by Sid Meier about random number generation, so this is like the gist of it. Turn-based tactical games are all about risk management. Random chance doesn't mean that anything can happen. So make risk manageable. The game should feel somewhat predictable. It's about managing that risk, not just waiting for whatever random thing to happen. It's perfectly okay for a flimsy plan to fail. So, for example, if you have like 20% chance to hit, no one really ever expects that to work. It's nice that it sometimes does, but you do not it's not like you plan your strategy and hang it on that 20% chance. But it's not okay for a great plan to fail miserably. This is why the famous XCOM 90% chance to hit misses are such a thing. Because you played your moves right, like you played it strategically, you positioned your characters well, you flanked your enemies, you have all the buffs and whatnot, and you still lose because of that random number generation. And you'll get a lot of flack for that, as in you'll receive negative feedback that the game is not fair, there are difficulty spikes and whatever. 11, get rid of floor switching. So that's the big change between our previous games and our current game. So the big question is, do you really need elevation? No, you don't. You don't need elevation. You need visual verticality. That's correct. And by that I mean some visual stuff above your level, below your level, and lots of stuff below and in between. But gameplay verticality just isn't worth it. So if you can get rid of switching the floors, and you probably can, then you should. Anything you want to achieve in gameplay through verticality, you can achieve through other means. Because elevation in games like XCOM is literally just areas where you have an additional chance to hit bonus. That is it. You don't need the whole cumbersome UX of floor switching. And 12, abilities are king. Don't cut corners or save resources on abilities. The best way to make tactical combat interesting is to create a set of interesting character abilities. Focus your design efforts on those, and I guarantee your game will be good, if your abilities are good. Okay, that is it. That was fast. So, are there any questions? Yeah, well, we will post the slides online on Artificer social media sometime soon. And again, we're always hiring, especially designers. So, do we have questions?
Hello. What do you think about twisting numbers in player favor? For example, his character is dying, and do you, for example, increase his dodge chance so he will have a more epic feeling of dodging the incoming failure?
Okay, so the problem with failure, especially in games that have a limited and like finite set of constraints. Like for example, if you get shot in a shooter, it's like the loop allows you to recuperate and fix that before we move on. In tactical battles, when you get hurt, shot, or one of your characters is down, your resources are getting severely limited, right? And that can cause a snowballing effect of failure, because now you have less shots that you can fire at your enemies. So, what I prefer to do is build mechanics that counter that. So, for example, our characters will have a bonus for that occurs when, but it's like an open mechanic. We don't do that under the table. We have a mechanic that boosts you when one of your characters is down, yeah, to kind of counter that. We also do a lot of RNG shuffling under the table, as in without the player knowing, and we adjust the chances to hit for both the player and the enemy, depending on how well you're doing.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
Hi. I have a question. Do you have an opinion on partial success mechanics? So maybe in XCOM, instead of doing 95% to hit but 5% to fail, if you're close to an enemy, 80% to hit, but 20% to kind of miss but still do 1 damage. So it's still success, but less. So you still have, you don't have to...
So you mean like grazes?
Yeah, things like that, and maybe generalized to all other things like healing. You heal them for a little bit. Would that be an acceptable solution to random number generation issues?
Okay, so there are 2 things here. One is given how simplified and symbolic turn-based titles tend to be, they kind of look like board games, and you have like the health pools are small and the number of action points are small. Like it's kind of, there are a lot of simplifications, and these simplifications cause edge cases where you cannot solve without making the system more complex, right? So what you're describing, like grazes and such, they're very cool, interesting mechanics to address that problem. So what if, instead of treating it binary, it's a hit or it's a miss, you do stuff like in between, right? But the problem is that it elevates complexity and lowers accessibility. So now you have a lot of stuff happening on the screen to address the fact that you first simplified the game, that created edge cases, so you added more systems to address that, So it's a very chicken and egg and cat and mouse kind of thing. Yeah, I don't think it's solvable unless you. So it's a matter of difficulty. If you get your balance right, then the edge cases won't matter that much. Or you can manipulate with all the systems in your game, including the AI, to avoid the weird edge cases and not have those situations. Or like cheat under the table, so if you're in good position and you're behind full cover and the angle is bad, they just won't hit you. That is it. The player doesn't have to know.
I know it's in tabletop, like role-playing games especially, I think because cheating is frowning in those games. Usually, I think like those games to a significant success have involved those mechanics, but usually they add only 1 step, like only one in between, as you said, probably for complexity. So.
Yeah. Well, in video games, we get to do a lot of shit, without the player knowing, and they're happy for it. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
I have one more question.
Go ahead.
Have you played Dungeons and Dragons? Any edition?
What? Never heard of that.
No, but have you played it? And do you have an opinion on how turn-based combat works in this game? Whether it's good, bad, or?
So I haven't played much of Dungeons and Dragons. I preferred our systems always, but I'll answer this question with a question. Which edition do you mean?
Whichever you played the most.
I don't know. No, sorry, I cannot elaborate on that.
Okay, 5th edition?
I have no idea. I was just trying to wing it.
Okay. I would interested in like all the answers for all the editions.
Well, the thing is, given how much turn-based tactical games I do when I play pen and paper RPGs, I try to stay out of combat. I'm done with that.
Sure. Thanks.
Thanks.
Hey, thank you for your talk.
Thank you for your amazing game.
Thanks, as always. Let's say you have a game with a focus on melee combat, but it's happening in man-made structures. Let's say a medieval castle with knights duking it out. Which grid would you go for, or whether you would have some, I don't know, other
I would try to benefit from that and go for an art style that has man-made structures that work with hexes. They're like roundish, or on like not square and rectangle. You don't really need that, right? So I think that's a great opportunity, really, to take that hindrance and turn it into a feature.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. Thanks.
Sure.
Hi, thanks for a great talk.
Hello.
I have an opportunity to ask someone wiser than me, so I have to. perfectly viable actions being made 100% successful. What I mean, in XCOM is a random number generation is a loaded topic, but in XCOM you have always slight chance to miss unless you are directly in front of the enemy and putting the guy on his head. When you have a good plan, and it's a really good plan, is it viable to reward the player with 100% of the accuracy? Or you have to leave them the field to make mistake?
So I would say, so what we are usually going for is, as you put an effort into execution, into planning, you get to increase the chance of success. And because right off the bat, the things that have big chance of success are not exactly effective or very costful. So for example, the grenade always lands where it's supposed to and deals a specific number of damage, but the grenades are a finite resource. And we have melee attacks that are far less powerful, but they do have 100% chance to hit.
It's almost funny, because those people aren't around anymore. I've got different people in different positions supporting me, helping me out through all of this, and I'm very, very
so there's that.
to that. It's been a long and interesting year. I'm in a different place,
the way I see it is 100% chance to do whatever and get guaranteed results is fine as long as you have the player work for it, and the benefit is proportionate to their effort and the investment they did. So you can have a very powerful ability that will, let's just twist that concept and consider the opposite. So for example, you would have this amazing, very powerful ability that costs your Latins, I don't know, drains your health and has 90% chance it will kill all enemies in the radius or not.
But there's a 10% chance.
And there's a chance, and so there's a 10% chance it will fail. So you don't want to have that, right? So the player build up, played the game well, and are rewarded with a failure. Yeah? So that you don't want to have. So going at it the other way, again, we try to ensure the ball is in their court. And if it's a very powerful, very costful, it's usually about the cost, the gameplay investment. So the turn spent, the action points, the resources, the money, whatever, invested into that, to that end, then they can increase that probability to 100%.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Hi, I have a quick question regarding the RNG as well, because RNG is sometimes a pain in the ass.
Sure.
What do you think about working around the RNG issues with the kind of a pseudo RNG? I don't know if you're aware of that. For example, Dota, which is not turn-based system, but it does the pseudo RNG. So for example, if you have 4 units, of which every unit has, for example, 30% to hit, if first misses, the second one underneath the table has already 40% to hit, because you're taking the chances, and in the 4th or 5th turn you will have 80% to hit just to reward the player. What do you think about that instead of doing a pure RNG systems?
With the turn-based tactical randomness-based games I did, I would never do proper real RNG ever. But so the thing is, you want to have, so what you're usually going for is have something that kind of looks like, do we still have time? Or is it a break now? Okay. So what I think is the perfect balance is to make a system that presents itself on UX as chance to hit, because it's very accessible. People get that. It's you just present a percentage chance, and people kind of know what to expect out of that, right? But do a lot of gameplay fixing stuff underneath, right? Because if you were to make all that stuff transparent, it would clog the UX. right? Because there are so many rules and so many effects, and like if you were to display all the buffs and everything that's happening there, like all the floating bonuses and like snowballing bonus for finding loot, for example, no one ever displays that, or maybe some people do. But like make it seem simple for the simpletons and do a lot of cheating underneath the table. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I have a question about managing the abilities cost, because you said use 2 points for everything, and what do you use for like one-time abilities like specials or something? Do you have anything opinion about that? Like you have, let's say, I don't know, items you can throw once and they disappear.
Yeah.
Like, do you use them? You think it's a good addition to the tool set to the game, or?
Yeah, totally. So the problem with those is, I would say, more of a meta problem, depending on your meta game. So it's a very common problem to have the player not use the finite stuff. Like you would finish Fallout and have 150 Steam packs in your backpack, just in case you're going to need them later. So you crawl through the game and you save scum, but don't use the medkits, you know? So it's that kind of problem. Like, how do you address that, you know? So what we do, yeah?
So maybe about the special abilities that you can use once per fight, let's say.
But that's literally the same problem.
Okay.
Right? You don't know when is the best moment, especially if you keep throwing stuff at the player, like you have reinforcements in XCOM, right? If you keep throwing stuff at the player, they might not know when is the right moment, right? Because you want them to use that in the right moment. They have no idea when that is, right? Unless you kind of make it clear. Like, you can make that clear with, say, if you have like, what do you call them? Like games where you have waves of enemies coming, and you know when the wave is coming, and you know which one is going to be the big one, right? Like in a lot of tower defense games have that. So that's where, like, if you have like a structure of events that is transparent, then the player will know when to use the limited abilities. Otherwise, you know, how would they know?
Okay, so I've played one game, I don't remember the name, but they used the abilities could unlock during the gameplay, and like it was your chance. What do you think about that? Like giving the player the opportunity to cast it, or they just lose it? Like I would
say that's a good idea. Yeah.
It was the best design I've seen. And
yeah, it's pretty cool. Like whatever way you get to like kind of push the player, like use this or it's going to be wasted, is beneficial to the player actually using that ability. That being said, that can cause frustration if they miss that or if the time is wrong, because, for example, maybe you just killed all the enemies, the next reinforcement is around the corner, there's no way to reach them, and so you cannot use your ability effectively, right? So creating that gap where you kind of force the player, you have to ensure there's something to use that on.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, Jaco, good to see you. Hello. We were laughing, but we were thinking if we will have a % of chance to actually ask the question. So yeah, it was 100%. So I'm thinking, like, if you design a game that is for hardcore players, what mechanics you would maybe bring back from original XCOM or other games like Jagged Alliance that are right now not for the audience that we have. We want to, you know, aim broad, so that's why we're doing the kind of 2 action points. It's cool, I like it. But if you want to make a hardcore game for people like me that love XCOM 1, the original one, how it would look like?
So that's a very interesting question, because the first thing that popped to my mind was just get the Jagged Alliance IP and do that. Do Jagged Alliance, but good. I mean, obviously the second one was good, but the rest was holy shit, right? So that's what I would do, I guess. Like, I don't think you get to nitpick out of those abilities and like can selectively take stuff from those games, because the RPG Codex people who like, but like you implemented only 90% of those mechanics, but I like that one, you know? So yeah, I would say you have to deliver the full package, otherwise they'll fucking destroy you. Yeah, that would be my guess. Okay, so the questions are off because the mic is no longer there. Thank you very much for coming to my talk, and I'll see you around.